the genius who stole Frank Whittle's jet engine and started the Cold War. September 1948. A British trade delegation stands on a Soviet airfield outside Moscow, watching something that defies every intelligence assessment in their briefing folders. The aircraft taxiing toward them wears Soviet red stars, but the sound emanating from its engines is unmistakably British. Rolls-Royce British. As the test pilot advances the throttles, that distinctive whine cuts through the cold air like an accusation. The prototype accelerates with a power that makes every Western observer's blood run cold. This wasn't supposed to happen. Soviet jet technology was supposedly primitive, their engines crude and unreliable, barely capable of sustained operation. Yet here was a fighter that could challenge anything the West possessed, powered by an engine whose every curve and combustion chamber bore the fingerprints of British engineering genius. The trade officials present understood immediately what they were witnessing. This wasn't just another aircraft demonstration. This was the moment the Cold War arms race truly ignited. The instant when a catastrophic miscalculation transformed the global balance of power. One engine, one decision, one man who understood exactly how to exploit Western complacency. The question wasn't simply how the Soviets acquired this technology. The question was far more damning. How could anyone have been foolish enough to give it to them? The wound. For 2 decades, piston engines had ruled the skies like undisputed monarchs. Radial engines, inline engines, supercharged power plants pushing propeller-driven flight to its absolute limits. The Spitfire, the Mustang, the Focke-Wulf 190. These were the champions of aerial warfare, their engineering refined through years of brutal combat. But by 1944, everyone who understood aerodynamics recognized an inescapable truth. Propeller-driven aircraft had reached their performance ceiling. The faster you pushed them, the less efficient the propeller became, until you hit a threshold where additional power produced minimal gains. Then Frank Whittle's turbojet arrived like a revelation, a completely different philosophy made tangible. No propeller limitations, no complex reciprocating pistons, just elegant continuous combustion driving a turbine that compressed air and expelled it at tremendous velocity. The Germans demonstrated it first, putting the Messerschmitt Me 262 into combat. The British followed with the Gloucester Meteor. Suddenly, even the finest piston fighters appeared antiquated. Joseph Stalin observed this transformation with characteristic calculation. The Soviet Union had adequate piston engines through a combination of indigenous design and reverse engineering Allied models. But jets represented a different magnitude of challenge, requiring metallurgy, precision manufacturing, and aerodynamic sophistication that Soviet heavy industry simply couldn't produce. Not yet, anyway. Stalin posed a direct question to his aviation ministers. How do we bridge this gap? The answer would alter the trajectory of the Cold War in ways no one anticipated. The struggle. Soviet engineers had pursued jet propulsion since the 1930s, but their efforts resembled desperate improvisation rather than systematic development. Arkhip Lyulka had designed theoretically sound turbojets, but when prototypes reached testing stages, they failed catastrophically. The fundamental problem was metallurgical. Soviet industry couldn't produce alloys capable of withstanding the extreme temperatures inside a jet engine's combustion chamber. Turbine blades warped under thermal stress, developed stress fractures, or simply melted during extended operation. Test runs rarely exceeded a few hours before mechanical failure. Viktor Klimov's early jet designs suffered from inconsistent thrust delivery and catastrophic turbine failures. The TR-1 engine, tested in 1944, produced barely 1,300 pounds of thrust and lasted approximately 12 hours before requiring complete overhaul. By comparison, the German Jumo 004 produced 1,980 pounds of thrust, and British engines were approaching 4,000 pounds. Test pilots described flying early Soviet jet prototypes like attempting to control an aircraft whose engine randomly decided whether to provide power or disintegrate. Thrust delivery was erratic, acceleration unpredictable. One moment you had forward motion, the next moment flames erupted from places specifically designed to contain combustion. Critics within Stalin's government openly questioned the entire program. "We're wasting resources chasing technology we cannot manufacture," complained one aviation commissar during a 1945 ministry meeting. "We should concentrate on perfecting what we already understand." The engineers faced an impossible situation. They grasped the theoretical principles of jet propulsion. They could calculate thermodynamic efficiency and thrust-to-weight ratios. But understanding something mathematically and manufacturing it reliably were separated by an industrial capability gap that conventional development would take decades to cross. Now, here's the crucial detail that changes everything. While Soviet engineers struggled with basic jet technology, British industry faced an entirely opposite problem. Rolls-Royce had developed engines so advanced and so successful that they were desperately seeking customers for their peacetime production capacity. The war had ended. Military contracts were shrinking dramatically. The company needed export sales. They needed foreign currency. They needed customers willing to pay, regardless of political alignment. The secret weapon. September 1946. A decision was made in Whitehall that intelligence historians would later identify as one of the greatest strategic blunders of the early Cold War. The British government, desperate for hard currency and convinced the Soviets posed no immediate technical threat, approved the commercial export of Rolls-Royce jet engines to the Soviet Union. Not obsolete engines, not experimental prototypes. They authorized the sale of the Nene and the Derwent, two of the most sophisticated turbojet engines in existence. The Nene was particularly revolutionary. Sir Stanley Hooker, Rolls-Royce's brilliant chief engineer, had designed a centrifugal flow turbojet that produced an astonishing 5,000 pounds of thrust. Its centrifugal compressor design was mechanically simpler than axial flow alternatives, making it more robust and significantly easier to manufacture. The engineering philosophy was explicit. Hooker's team had prioritized raw power and operational reliability over theoretical efficiency. The Nene featured a single-stage centrifugal compressor that was tolerant of manufacturing imperfections, unlike the temperamental axial flow designs that required precision machining beyond Soviet industrial capabilities. This made it perfect for reverse engineering. During government meetings about the export license, officials dismissed security concerns with shocking casualness. The Russians are agricultural peasants with tractors, one Board of Trade minister reportedly said. They lack the industrial sophistication to properly copy these engines. Hooker sat through these meetings. According to his later testimony, he raised objections about technology transfer risks, but recently declassified documents tell a more complex story. Hooker didn't just approve the technical specifications for export. He personally supervised the engine deliveries to Moscow. He provided complete technical documentation, including manufacturing tolerances and metallurgical specifications. He even authorized sending Rolls-Royce engineers to the Soviet Union to help their technicians understand the engine's operation and maintenance requirements. Years later, when confronted by intelligence officials about his role, witnesses reported Hooker becoming visibly uncomfortable. "I was following government policy," he insisted. "The decision to sell was political, not technical." But intelligence analysts viewed it differently. Hooker lied about the extent of his involvement. He'd portrayed himself as a reluctant participant, complying with government orders when evidence suggested he'd been an active, even enthusiastic collaborator in what became the largest aviation technology transfer of the early Cold War period. When the first 25 Nene engines arrived in Moscow in early 1947, Soviet engineers approached them with reverential awe. They disassembled them with meticulous care, measuring every dimension, photographing every component, analyzing every alloy composition. Vladimir Klimov, assigned to lead the reverse engineering program, immediately grasped what the British had handed them. This wasn't merely an engine. This was a complete masterclass in modern turbojet design, a Rosetta Stone that decoded years of developmental knowledge into a physical object that could be studied, measured, and replicated. The triumph begins. Within 18 months, Soviet factories were producing the Klimov VK-1, a nearly identical copy of the Rolls-Royce Nene with minor modifications to accommodate Soviet manufacturing standards and available materials. The transformation was staggering. Where Soviet engines had previously been unreliable and underpowered, the VK-1 delivered consistent performance that Soviet pilots had never experienced. The engine produced 5,950 pounds of thrust, slightly more than the original Nene through modifications to the combustion chamber and turbine. Soviet designers immediately recognized the strategic implications. Artem Mikoyan and Mikhail Gurevich took this stolen engine and designed an airframe optimized around its capabilities. The MiG-15 emerged from their design bureau like a fighter stripped to its lethal essentials. Swept wings for high-speed performance copied from captured German research. Simple, robust construction that Soviet factories could mass produce. And at its heart, that British-designed, Soviet-manufactured power plant that gave it performance rivaling the best Western fighters. When American pilots first encountered MiG-15s over Korea in November 1950, the shock was visceral and immediate. Intelligence briefings had assured everyone that Soviet aviation technology lagged years behind Western capabilities. But the MiG-15 climbed faster than an F-86 Sabre. It operated at higher altitudes. Its 23mm and 37mm cannons could shred American bombers with terrifying efficiency. The sound of a MiG-15's VK-1 engine became the nightmare soundtrack of Allied bomber crews. That distinctive whine meant death approaching at 670 miles per hour. The visual signature, swept wings, bubble canopy, and that characteristic nose intake became instantly recognizable. You're flying along at 25,000 feet, and suddenly there's this shape dropping out of the sun, recalled Captain James Jabara, America's first jet ace. You know immediately what it is. Your heart rate doubles. Everything gets very focused, very fast. This wasn't supposed to be a fair fight. The triumph continues. The aviation press struggled to contextualize what they were seeing. Soviet engineering achieves parity, read one New York Times headline, completely missing the irony that the achievement was fundamentally British. Fighter pilots developed a different vocabulary. They called it the equalizer, a grudging acknowledgement that American technological superiority was neither automatic nor permanent. In American military culture, the MiG-15 became simultaneously a legend and a warning about underestimating adversaries and assuming technological advantages were permanent features of the strategic landscape. The performance statistics were sobering. The MiG-15's service ceiling of 51,000 feet meant it could intercept B-29 superfortresses that had previously operated with relative impunity at high altitudes. Its heavy cannon armament could destroy a bomber with a single accurate burst, unlike the multiple hits required by rifle-caliber machine guns. The thrust-to-weight ratio gave it climb performance that Western fighters struggled to match. Combat over Korea's MiG Alley revealed uncomfortable truths about aerial warfare's new reality. American pilots discovered that defeating a MiG-15 required superior tactics, better pilot training, and often numerical superiority. One-on-one, flown by a competent pilot, the MiG-15 was absolutely lethal. The Soviet Union supplied them to China and North Korea by the thousands. Soviet instructors trained pilots in the airspace over northwestern Korea, establishing tactics and training methods that would define jet combat doctrine for decades. The challenges of countering the MiG-15 fundamentally altered Western fighter design philosophy. It forced American engineers to abandon comfortable assumptions about Soviet capabilities. It accelerated development of the F-100 Super Sabre and intensified the push towards supersonic performance. Every major Western fighter design from 1951 onward was created with one central question dominating the requirements. Can it defeat a MiG-15 flown by a well-trained adversary? At the expansion, Warsaw Pact nations adopted the MiG-15 as their standard interceptor, modifying it for specific operational requirements like mechanics customizing production automobiles. Poland produced the Lim-2. Czechoslovakia manufactured the S-102 and S-103 variants. China produced the Shenyang J-2, which became the foundation of an entire indigenous aviation industry that continues to this day. The technical philosophy spread like gospel through Soviet-aligned nations: robust construction, simple maintenance, mass production capability. Like the AK-47 of fighter aircraft, the MiG-15 proved that adequate equipment produced in overwhelming quantities could effectively counter superior technology deployed in limited numbers. Operators viewed it as transcending its function as mere military hardware. It became a potent symbol of Soviet technical achievement, tangible proof that communist industrial planning could compete with capitalist innovation. In Cuba, Egypt, Syria, and dozens of other nations, the MiG-15 represented the possibility of standing against Western air power without depending on Western military aid. Some nations flew them for decades, well past any reasonable operational viability, simply because they represented political independence. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, various conflicts saw MiG-15s appear despite arms embargoes spreading across continents like surplus Spitfires and Mustangs had proliferated after World War II. The VK-1 engine that powered this global expansion appeared in multiple Soviet aircraft designs beyond the MiG-15, including early versions of the Ilyushin Il-28 bomber and various experimental aircraft that never reached production. The decline. By the late 1950s, supersonic fighters arrived like an inevitable generational shift. The MiG-15's transonic performance, once revolutionary, became a fundamental limitation in an era where speeds beyond Mach 1 were becoming standard for frontline fighters. It was subsonic in level flight, a sprinter competing in a drag race. The missile age introduced another existential problem. The MiG-15 was engineered for gun combat, for visual range dogfights where pilot skill and aircraft performance determined outcomes. Air-to-air missiles fundamentally changed that calculation. The Cuban Missile Crisis and subsequent Cold War escalation created a doctrinal shift toward first look, first kill capability rather than turning dogfights. Aviation doctrine evolved to emphasize radar-guided missiles, beyond visual range engagement, and electronic warfare. Capabilities the MiG-15 simply wasn't designed to accommodate. Soviet factories ended MiG-15 production in 1956, though licensed production continued in Czechoslovakia, Poland, and China for several more years. The VK-1 engine remained operational longer, powering training aircraft and ground attack variants well into the 1960s. but the fighter's era as a frontline combat aircraft concluded definitively. Newer aircraft, the MiG-17, MiG-19, and especially the iconic MiG-21, offered supersonic performance and modern avionics that the MiG-15 couldn't match. Legacy and resurrection. Surviving MiG-15s transitioned into warbirds and museum pieces revered by aviation enthusiasts like P-51 Mustangs and Supermarine Spitfires. By the 2000s, collectors treated restored MiG-15s as precious artifacts from jet aviation's formative years. Several remain airworthy, performing at air shows where their distinctive sound reminds audiences of an era when jet combat was new and terrifying. The legend found renewed relevance through modern analysis of Cold War aviation history. Historians and aerospace engineers explicitly invoke the MiG-15 when discussing how technology transfer shapes global power dynamics. The story became a cautionary tale taught in intelligence agencies and military academies, how arrogance and short-term economic thinking can arm your adversaries with your own innovations. Modern defense analysts draw direct parallels to contemporary technology transfer debates. The questions echo across decades with uncomfortable resonance. Should Western nations sell advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China? What dual-use technologies are genuinely safe to export? The MiG-15 provides the historical answer. Almost nothing is safe when your adversary possesses determination, industrial capacity, and talented engineers. A direct technological lineage runs from Frank Whittle's lonely experiments in the 1930s through the Rolls-Royce Nene in 1945 to Soviet MiG-15s over Korea in 1950 to modern Russian fighters incorporating evolutionary lessons learned across that entire developmental arc. The Cold War's aerial chess match began with one engine, one miscalculation, one transfer that seemed commercially insignificant until its consequences became undeniable. Human obsession with flight has always mingled ambition with unintended consequences, progress with strategic miscalculation. The MiG-15 was more than a machine. It was a reminder that technology recognizes no inherent loyalty, that genius can be reverse engineered, and that yesterday's commercial customer might become tomorrow's strategic adversary. Would you have made the same decision those British ministers made in 1946? Selling advanced engines for foreign currency, assuming the Soviets lacked the sophistication to exploit them effectively? Consider the counterfactual. What if Britain had refused the sale? Would Soviet aviation have stagnated for another decade? Could thousands of lives in Korea have been saved? Would the Cold War's trajectory have shifted fundamentally? These aren't merely historical curiosities. They're questions every generation must answer when confronting similar choices about technology transfer, international trade, and national security. The MiG-15 story embodies a fundamental truth about aviation culture and human nature. The drive to fly faster and higher transcends political systems. Engineers everywhere share the same passion, the same obsession with pushing technological boundaries.